At my husband's will reading, the lawyer said, "Everything goes to the mistress." I smiled and opened my own folder. That's how my story begins. If you're listening to this, I want you to stay with me till the very end, because everything is not what it seems. And as you listen, tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy stories like this, because what happened in that lawyer's office changed my entire life. Let me take you back. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Thompson," the lawyer said, adjusting his glasses like he was nervous about his own words. "According to this will, everything goes to the mistress." The room went still, like someone had hit a mute button on the world. I heard someone gasp behind me. It might have been my sister. Or it might have been me. My ears were buzzing so loud it was hard to tell. I sat there in my dark navy dress, my hands folded neatly on my lap, my back straight, the way my mother taught me when I was a little girl in church. The blinds behind the lawyer were half open, slats of pale afternoon light cutting across his desk. Dust floated in those beams of light, lazily drifting around, like the universe didn't care what was happening to my life in that little office. To my left sat my son Aaron, jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping in his cheek. His hands were fists on his knees, his knuckles white against his brown skin. To my right, in a red dress too bright for a widow's gathering, sat her, Tiffany, the mistress. Her lips were glossy, her eyes fake sad, and her hand rested protectively on her slightly swollen belly, like she was assembling a performance in slow motion. "Yes," the lawyer continued, clearing his throat again. "As per the most recent will of Mr. Samuel Thompson, dated 8 months ago, all properties, funds, and assets are bequeathed to Miss Tiffany Owens." He said her name like it tasted sour. A chair creaked behind us. Someone muttered, "Lord have mercy." Papers rustled. The air in that room thickened into something you could almost chew. Aaron shot up from his chair, the legs scraping loud against the floor. "What do you mean everything?" he shouted. "That's our family house. That's my mom's house. He can't just—" "Aaron," I said softly, placing my hand on his arm. "Sit down." My voice surprised even me. It was calm, too calm for the kind of explosion we'd just heard. He stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe he thought I should be throwing chairs or falling on the floor like in those dramatic movies. But no, I just sat there and nodded slowly, like I'd been expecting this all along. Because I had. I glanced at Tiffany. She tried to look humble, eyes cast down, but there was a tiny victorious smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. She smoothed an imaginary wrinkle from her dress, like she was already getting comfortable in a life she thought she'd inherited. "Mrs. Thompson," the lawyer said, turning to me, his voice softer. "I know this is shocking. I'm very sorry, but you must understand, this is a legally binding document." The old clock on the wall ticked loudly between his words. I smiled, reached into my handbag, and pulled out a thick, neatly labeled folder. The sound of the clasp opening seemed louder than it should have been. I placed it on the table, right in the center, between his papers and Tiffany's perfectly manicured hand. "I understand perfectly," I said. "That's why I brought my own folder." His eyebrows shot up. Tiffany blinked, the little smile freezing. Aaron sank back into his chair slowly, never taking his eyes off me. "Now, before I tell you what was in that folder, let me take you back to where all of this really started. Long before Tiffany, long before the will, long before my husband forgot who he was. And as I tell you, I want you to let me know in the comments, at what point would you have walked away? Or would you have stayed, like I did? I was born in 1965, in a little house in the south side of Chicago. The kind of neighborhood where kids played in the street until the streetlights blinked on, and mamas leaned out the window yelling full government names. "Denise Elaine, get your behind in this house before I come out there." That was my mama, Loretta. She had a voice that could slice through any noise, and a love that wrapped around you like a quilt. She worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices at night and waiting tables in the morning at a diner that always smelled like burnt coffee and bacon grease. My daddy, well, he was in and out. In when things were good, when he had a little money and jokes to tell. Out when rent was due, when the liquor got too strong and the streets called his name louder than we did. That's about all I'll say on that. One memory from childhood never left me. I was 9, sitting at the kitchen table doing homework while Mama counted her tips and stacked them in little piles. "Why you count it like that?" I asked, watching her move the worn, crumpled dollar bills. "Because money runs if you don't look it in the eye," she said. "You don't leave it loose. You name every dollar. You tell it where it's going before it decides to go on its own." She split the money into envelopes she'd labeled in faded pen. Rent, light, groceries, church, just in case. "What's just in case?" I asked. She glanced at me, her eyes suddenly serious. "That's for when life does what life always does, baby. Something you ain't ready for." I took that lesson and tucked it deep inside me. I grew up fast. By 13, I was watching my baby sister, cooking rice and beans, and making sure the door was locked twice before bed. I learned how to stretch a pack of chicken for 3 days, how to wash clothes in the sink when the laundromat money ran out, and how to smile at school so nobody knew my stomach was growling. Education was my escape, though. Books were my way out, and I clung to them like a life raft. I'd read anything I could get my hands on: novels, magazines, old newspapers. I used to stay up late under the covers with a flashlight, my eyes burning, but my mind flying to places far away from squeaky floorboards and overdue notices. I met my future husband, Samuel Thompson, at a church picnic when I was 22. The church had set up long tables in the park: fried chicken, potato salad, pound cake. Kids ran around in grass-stained clothes, and the choir director's little daughter kept singing the same line of a song over and over until her mama told her to hush. I was standing near the drinks table, pouring myself some red punch from a big glass dispenser, when I heard a voice behind me. "Careful with that. Spill it on your dress, and your mama's gonna come after both of us." I turned around. He was handsome in that smooth, polished way that made women turn their heads and pretend they weren't. Tall, deep brown skin, a smile bright enough to light up half the block, and a laugh that came from his belly. He wore a crisp white shirt and pressed slacks like he had money, or like he wanted people to think he did. "Can I fix you a plate?" he asked, standing over me with a paper plate already in his hand. "I already got one," I said, lifting my own for him to see, piled with chicken and macaroni. "Then maybe I can fix you a life," he said, winking. I had to laugh. It was so corny. But sometimes corny works, especially when you haven't had much romance in your life, beyond boys who thought a date was sharing a bag of chips on a stoop. We started talking. He told me he was working at a bank downtown, trying to climb that corporate ladder. "I grew up not too far from here," he said, nodding towards the block. "I promised myself I wouldn't die on the same corner I was born on." I told him I'd just finished my nursing program and was starting at the hospital in a few weeks. "A nurse and a banker," he said. "We're gonna be all right." We sat on a little hill watching kids play tag as the sun went down. He told me about his dreams: owning property, starting a business, never having to count change at the register like his mama did. I told him about mine: a little house of my own, a garden, a kitchen where the lights always stayed on. He walked me home that evening, his hand hovering near my back but never quite touching. "You mind if I call you sometime, Miss Nurse?" he asked when we reached my door. "As long as you don't call after 10, I said. "I got early shifts." He grinned. "I'll call at 9:59 then." Those of you listening, if someone used that line on you, would you laugh and give them your number? Or would you roll your eyes and walk away? Tell me in the comments. Those first years with Samuel were simple, imperfect, but full of hope. We got married in that same church where we met. The decorations were plastic flowers from the discount store and folding chairs borrowed from the community center. Mama wore her best blue dress and cried loud enough for the whole neighborhood, dabbing her eyes with a tissue that kept dissolving. My sister kept fussing with the hem of my dress like that would magically make it look more expensive. When the pastor said, "You may kiss the bride," Samuel smiled so big I thought his face might split. He whispered, "We're gonna make it, niece," into my ear. Nobody had ever said "we" about my future before. It felt like a blessing. We didn't have a honeymoon. We had a weekend off. We spent it unpacking boxes in our tiny one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. The pipes clanked at night, and the whole place smelled like detergent and steam, but to me, it was a castle. I worked nights at the hospital. He worked days at the bank. We passed each other in the hallway sometimes like shits. A kiss on the cheek, a quick joke, a whispered, "You good?" Scribbled notes on the kitchen counter. We dreamed together. One day, he said, laying in bed with his arm under his head, We're gonna own a house with a big porch. I'm gonna sit out there drinking coffee, and you're gonna fuss at the kids for running too fast." "And who said I'm the one that's gonna be fussing?" I asked, poking him in the side. "You know you will," he laughed. "You got that mama voice already, even with no kids." He was right. We wanted kids so badly. It didn't happen right away. Those of you who've been through that know what I mean. The quiet disappointment month after month. The little stick with a single line. The prayers whispered into pillows. The doctor visits, where they ask questions that make you feel like you broke something you didn't even know you had. "Maybe it's not meant for us," I said once, staring at the ceiling in the dark, listening to the neighbor's TV through the wall. "Don't talk like that," he said, turning on his side to face me. "You're gonna have our baby. You watch. God didn't bring us this far to leave us empty-handed." Sometimes faith sounds like stubbornness. His did that night. He was right, again. 2 years later, I was holding my son, Aaron, in my arms, crying so hard the nurse asked if I was okay. "I'm okay," I said, voice shaking. "I'm just grateful." Motherhood changed everything. Suddenly, the long shifts, the double shifts, the sleepy mornings, they all had a purpose. I'd take extra hours at the hospital, and Samuel started taking night classes in finance so he could move up at work. We were tired, but it was the kind of tired that feels like building something, not just surviving. We were a team. At least, that's what I thought. Now, if you're still with me, and you're feeling for this younger version of me, go ahead and hit that like button. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been so sure about someone, only to find out years later you didn't know them at all? We bought our first house when Aaron was 8. It was a modest brick house with peeling white trim, a cracked walkway, and a tiny patch of grass pretending to be a lawn. But it had a yard and a little porch. Just like Samuel promised, when we first walked in, the place smelled like dust and old linoleum. "We can fix it," I said, already seeing yellow paint in the kitchen and curtains at the windows in my mind. Samuel walked through each room, tapping walls like he knew what he was doing. 3 bedrooms, he said. 1 for us, 1 for Aaron, and 1 for whatever else God sends us. Or an office, he added, smiling. We painted the kitchen yellow that first weekend. The cheap paint dripped, and my arms ached from rolling it on. But when we finished, the room glowed. I planted roses out front, little stubs at first, unsure if they'd take in that tired soil. I remember kneeling in the dirt, pressing each root down gently, whispering, "Grow, please grow." Samuel hammered in nails like he'd been a handyman all his life. He hung our wedding picture over the worn-out fireplace, saying, "Now the house knows who it belongs to." Aaron rode his bike up and down the sidewalk like he owned the whole block, skidding to a stop right next to the porch. "Ma, watch this," he'd shout, over and over, as if I could ever stop watching him. Money was never overflowing. But we made it stretch. I learned how to make a bag of beans feed a family for 3 days. Beans and rice, beans and cornbread, beans and whatever vegetables were on sale that week. I packed lunches in reused containers, clipped coupons from the Sunday paper, and took overtime when it was available. Samuel started earning more, but with that came more time away. Work trips, client dinners, networking. I asked Woods, raising an eyebrow as he adjusted his tie in the mirror. "Is that what they call staying out till midnight now?" He laughed, kissed my forehead. "Baby, come on. I'm doing this for us, for our future. You want Aaron to have better than we did, right?" I did. Oh, I did. I wanted to believe him. I did believe him, for a long time. Still, there were little things. Early warning signs, like God was trying to whisper in my ear. One afternoon, when Aaron was about 12, I was folding laundry on the couch, the TV murmuring some drama in the background. The house was full of warm, clean clothes smell. Aaron came in from school, threw his backpack down, and mumbled, "Dad's got a new car?" "A new car?" I frowned, shaking out a t-shirt. "What are you talking about?" "There's a black Mercedes parked outside," he said, peeking through the curtains. "Did we get rich and nobody told me?" My heart skipped. I went to the window. Sure enough, there was a sleek black Mercedes in front of our house, shining like it owned the street. As we watched, Samuel stepped out, laughing with a woman in a tiny suit and 2 high heels. She leaned against the car like she belonged there. "Stop," "That's just a coworker," he said later when I asked at dinner, avoiding my eyes as he cut into his meatloaf. "She gave me a ride home. My car's in the shop." "Her skirt doesn't look like it's on its way to any bank," I said quietly, staring at my plate. "You jealous now?" He chuckled without much humor. "Come on, Denise. You know you're the only one for me." He reached across the table, squeezed my hand. His palm was warm. The gesture was so familiar, so practiced, that for a moment, doubt slipped away. Those of you listening, have you ever ignored your own intuition because you loved someone too much? Let me know in the comments if you've ever talked yourself out of what you knew deep down. Years passed. Aaron grew taller than me, then taller than his father. My boy had a quiet strength to him. He wasn't the loud show-off type. He got good grades, played a little basketball after school, and would sit with my mama, his grandma Loretta, playing dominoes on Saturdays instead of running the streets. "You work too much, Ma," he'd say, taking the grocery bags from my hands. "You need to rest. You got bags under your eyes. And who's going to pay these bills if I rest?" I'd ask, laughing. He'd glance toward the bedroom where Samuel was often sitting with his laptop open. "Dad, supposedly," he muttered once under his breath. "What was that?" "Nothing," he said quickly, grabbing another bag. Samuel did pay bills. He also bought himself nice suits and watches that cost more than my whole wardrobe. He'd come home smelling of cologne and something else I couldn't quite place. Sometimes I'd catch a trace of unfamiliar perfume on his collar, faint, but there. "Must be the secretary," he'd say, with a grin when I raised an eyebrow. "She hugs everybody. You know how some folks are." I started putting aside a little money here and there. Nothing dramatic, just small amounts in a savings account with my name only. When my overtime came in, I wouldn't announce it. Just silently move a piece of it into that just-in-case envelope Mama had taught me to have. Except now, my envelope was a bank account. It wasn't a secret, exactly. I just didn't advertise it. I'd seen too much growing up. A woman left with nothing because she didn't think of herself. I'm not going to end up like that. I whispered to myself every now and then, folding pay stubs and tucking them away. The real shift started when Aaron went off to college. That boy worked so hard to get a scholarship. Our kitchen table turned into mission control his senior year. College brochures, scholarship forms, essays, SAT prep books. I'd come home from the 12-hour shift, peel off my shoes, and sit beside him, meeting over his personal statements while my feet throbbed. "Ma, I don't want you and Dad breaking yourselves for my tuition," he said one night, rubbing his temples. It's too much, I can go to community college." "Your education is not breaking me," I said, tapping his forehead lightly with my pen. "This is an investment. You're going to go further than both of us. That's the plan. We'll figure it out." When the acceptance letter came, with a decent scholarship attached, we danced in the kitchen. I held that paper like it was the golden ticket out of every fear I'd ever had about him repeating our struggles. We drove him to campus with his boxes and bags, my heart breaking and swelling at the same time. The drive back home was so quiet it felt like a different world. The house seemed bigger without his shoes by the door, without his music leaking under his bedroom door. "You okay?" Samuel asked. One hand on the steering wheel, eyes on the road. "I'm fine," I said, staring out the window at the blur of highway lights. "Just gonna miss my baby." "He's not a baby anymore," Samuel said. "He's a man. Now maybe we can focus on us a little." I wanted to be happy about that. I really did. Part of me imagined date nights, weekend trips, rediscovering that couple we once were. But instead of more us, I started getting more, "I'll be home late, and I have another work dinner." Nights got longer, weekends got shorter. One particularly bad night, well past midnight. I was sitting up in bed with the lamp on, a book lying open in my lap. I wasn't really reading. My eyes kept flicking to the glowing numbers on the alarm clock. 12:34, 1:07, 1:39. I was waiting for the sound of his key in the door. When I finally heard it at almost 2 in the morning, I exhaled a breath I didn't even know I'd been holding. The front door creaked. His footsteps stumbled a little down the hall. The house, which had been silent as a held breath, seemed to inhale with him. He came into the bedroom, tie loose, shirt half untucked, eyes red. "You okay?" I asked softly, closing the book. "Yeah," he slurred. "Just a long night, clients." He flopped down to sit on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping beneath his weight. He smelled like whiskey and something sweet and floral that didn't come from our house. Smell like whiskey and cheap perfume, I said under my breath. What? He snapped, turning his head. Nothing. Go take a shower. He stared at me for a second, like he wanted to say something sharp. I could see the words forming behind his eyes. Then he swallowed, shrugged, and went into the bathroom. The water started running. That was the first night I lay awake. Not because he was gone, but because I realized I didn't recognize the man who'd come home. He used to sneak in late because he'd been picking up someone's shift, or helping a friend move, or stuck on a broken train. Now he snuck in late, smelling like cologne and lies. If you've ever watched someone you love slowly turn into a stranger, tell me in the comments how you handled it. Did you confront them? Did you wait? Did you pretend you didn't see it? The first time I met Tiffany, I didn't know she was going to rearrange my whole life. I just thought she was another new face in his ever-expanding work world. It was at a company family day barbecue his bank hosted one summer. Samuel insisted we go. It'll be good for me if they see my beautiful wife, he said, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. Networking, remember? You think promotions happen in those tiny offices? They happen over burgers and potato salad. I almost said no. I was tired. I'd just finished 3 back-to-back 12-hour shifts. My feet ached, my lower back was tight, and the idea of making small talk with strangers sounded worse than charting a whole ward by hand. But something in me said, go. So I did. The park was full of those pop-up tents and folding tables. They'd hung a banner that said, Thompson and Associates Family Appreciation Day, like we were all one big happy clan. Kids ran around with balloon animals, and a DJ played a mix of old-school R&B and whatever was on the radio that summer. I was watching some kids play tug-of-war when I heard a voice behind me. Mrs. Thompson, right? I turned around. She was younger than me by at least 15 years. Light brown skin, long straightened hair that cascaded down her back, a tiny gold necklace with her name on it. Tiffany. Her dress hugged every curve she had, and she wore heels in the grass without sinking, like she'd practiced. Yes, I'm Denise, I said, forcing a polite smile. I've heard so much about you, she said, her lip gloss catching the sunlight. Sam talks about you all the time. Sam, not Samuel, not Mr. Thompson. Sam. Oh, does he? I tilted my head. Yes, she laughed lightly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. You should have seen how excited he was planning this. He was like, my wife's coming, y'all, so behave. I nodded slowly. Something about her tone was off, like she was reciting lines she practiced in the mirror. Are you his assistant? I asked. She blinked. No, I'm in client relations. We work closely together. Closely, I repeated, letting the word roll around in my mouth. Right then, Samuel appeared at her side, a little too fast if you ask me. Ah, I see you two have met, he said, a little too brightly. Denise, this is Tiffany. She's one of the best at the firm. Keeps everything running. She slid her arm through his casually, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Then, as if she suddenly remembered I existed, she dropped it. Well, I'm going to go say hi to the others, she said. Nice to meet you, Mrs. Thompson. She walked away, her perfume lingering like a question mark. Client relations? I asked him quietly, as we watched her join a group by the grill. She's good at her job, he said. Don't start. I haven't said anything, I replied. Yet. He laughed, a little too loud, and walked towards the grill, calling out greetings. Later that day, I stood by the cooler, pouring another cup of that same too-sweet punch from years ago. Across the field, I saw Samuel and Tiffany under a tree, just off to the side. He leaned in to show her something on his phone. She laughed and slapped his arm lightly. It was a body language I knew too well. I'd done it myself, once upon a time. When they noticed me watching, they pulled apart too fast, too guilty. I sipped my punch and said nothing. Let me pause here and ask you, would you have confronted him right there, in the middle of that bright, sunny lie of a family day? Or would you have watched and waited, like I did? Drop it in the comments, because this right here was a crossroads. Over the next year, Tiffany's name started popping up more and more in casual conversations. We're working late. Tiffany and I have to finish this deal. Tiffany and I are going to a client dinner. Tiffany organized this event. You should see the way she works a room, babe. Her name started to sound like a little stone in my shoe, small but always there. One evening, I walked past Samuel's home office. Yes, the same office I'd secretly helped pay for with my just-in-case money when the bank cut his bonus one year, and heard him laughing on the phone. Not the polite work laugh, the deep, free laugh he used to share with me over burnt popcorn and old movies. All right, Tiff, he said. You're too much. You know that? Too much. I stood there, hand on the door frame, listening. My heartbeat pounded in my ears so loudly that his words started coming in and out like bad radio reception, but the tone was clear. He ended the call and walked out, nearly bumping into me. How long have you been standing there? He asked sharply, his smile dropping. Long enough, I said. To do what? His eyes narrowed. To eavesdrop? This is my house, I replied calmly. I can stand wherever I please. His eyes flashed. For a moment, I saw something ugly in them. Contempt, maybe, or fear. Then it was gone. You know what, Denise? You've been in a mood lately. He straightened his shirt. Maybe if you got out more, instead of whatever this is, you wouldn't be so suspicious all the time. I work 12-hour shifts at a hospital, I said. Trust me, I get out. Yeah, he muttered, brushing past me. Always playing the martyr. I could have yelled, I could have cried. Instead, I smiled a little. You're right, I said. Maybe I should get out more. He blinked, thrown off. Yeah, that's what I said. That night, after he fell asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and my old notebook. The house hummed around me, the refrigerator clicking on, a car passing outside, the clock ticking on the wall Mama had given us for our 5th anniversary. I made a list. My income, savings account balance, value of the house, whose name was on the deed, ours jointly, names of our closest friends who knew both of us. The lawyer I'd once taken care of in the hospital, who'd looked me in the eye and said, if you ever need anything, you call me. Nurses never ask for help, but they should. I didn't know exactly why I was making that list. I just knew that for the first time, I needed to be ready for something. I didn't know what yet. But my spirit did. If you're still listening, hit that like button, because from here, things started moving fast, and not in the way I expected. And tell me in the comments, have you ever started preparing for a storm before you even saw the clouds? The real earthquake came 2 years later. By then, Aaron had graduated college and was working his first job in another city. He called me every Sunday like clockwork. Ma, you okay over there? He'd ask, his voice crackling a little through the cheap connection on his break. I'm fine, baby, I'd say, stirring a pot of stew. How's the job? How's your apartment? You eating real food or just noodles? He'd laugh. I'm eating, I promise. I even cooked some chicken the other day. Almost set off the fire alarm, but I got it done. One Sunday, he hesitated a little too long. Ma, can I ask you something? Anything, I said, turning down the stove. Are you and Dad good? I felt my chest tighten. Why would you ask that? I don't know, he sighed. Every time I call, you say he's busy or out. I called him the other day, and he was weird. And I've seen some things on social media. My blood ran cold. What kind of things? Actors, he said reluctantly. Of him at events, with some woman. They look close. I sat down at the kitchen table. Send me the picture, I said. He did. My phone buzzed, and there it was. A photo from some corporate gala. Samuel in a sleek tuxedo, Tiffany in a silver dress that clung to her like it was painted on. They were standing close. Too close. His hand was around her waist, not in a polite work way, but in a way that said, this is mine. She was leaning into him, her smile aimed at the camera like a trophy. I stared at that picture for a long time. I didn't cry. The tears had dried up somewhere back at that park barbecue. Ma, Aaron's voice came through the phone. You still there? I'm here, I said quietly. Thank you for telling me. I'm glad you didn't keep it from me. I didn't know if I should, he began. You did right, I said. I'll take care of it. After I hung up, I went to the bedroom, opened Samuel's closet, and looked at his neatly pressed shirts hanging in a row. So many shades of blue and white. For 28 years, I had washed, ironed, and hung those shirts. For 28 years, I'd made sure he looked like the man he wanted the world to see. I walked back to the kitchen, picked up my notebook, and turned to a fresh page. At the top, I wrote in capital letters, plan. The first person I called was that lawyer, the one I'd taken care of in the hospital years earlier. Back then, he'd been in for a minor surgery, scared but trying not to show it. I'd held his hand before they wheeled him in and said, "Don't worry, we got you." When he'd come out fine and been discharged, he pressed his card into my hand. "Nurses are the backbone of this place," he'd said. "You ever need legal advice, you call me. No charge for the first visit. That's my way of paying you back for not letting me die of a panic attack." Now, years later, I pulled out that card from the little box where I kept odds and ends, old receipts, ticket stubs, small promises. "Miss Thompson," he said warmly when he recognized my voice. "I always knew you'd call me one day. I just hoped it wouldn't be for anything bad." "I don't know what it is yet," I said, "but I need to talk to you, in person." We met at his office on my day off. It was one of those old downtown buildings with creaky elevators and a waiting room that smelled like strong coffee and paper. He was older now, with more gray in his hair, but his eyes were still sharp. His name was Mr. Franklin. "Tell me everything," he said, folding his hands on the desk. "From the beginning. Don't leave out the messy parts. Those are usually the most important for court." So I did. I told him about the late nights, the perfume, Tiffany, the picture, the way Samuel talked to me lately. I told him about the house, our finances, what I knew and what I only suspected. "And what do you want?" he asked when I was done. "I want to be protected," I said simply. "I don't know what he's doing with our money. I don't know what he's planning. But I've seen enough women end up on the street because they trusted a man too much. I'm too old to start over from zero." He nodded slowly. "You're smart to come now and not later. Let's start with your house. You said your names are both on the deed." "Yes." "We can change that," he said calmly. I blinked. "We can what?" "There are ways," he said, "especially if one party has been financially irresponsible or diverting marital assets. We can start documenting, quietly. We can also talk about your will. Do you have one?" "No," I admitted. "We always said we'd do it one day." "Well," he smiled gently, "one day is today." Over the next few months, I became two women. By day, I was the same Denise, working at the hospital, comforting patients, taking blood pressure, joking with the techs, coming home and cooking dinner, asking Samuel about his day, nodding when he mentioned Tiffany's name like it was nothing. By night, I was someone else, making copies of bank statements, taking pictures of suspicious charges on my phone when he left his wallet on the dresser, forwarding emails from our joint account to a private one, meeting with my lawyer quietly, sitting in his office signing documents, setting up a trust in Aaron's name, changing my own will. I started paying attention to everything Samuel didn't think I understood. "Why are you so interested in the mail now?" he asked one afternoon when I grabbed the stack before he did. "Because sometimes there are coupons," I said casually, flipping through the envelopes. "You know I love a good sale." Meanwhile, my eyes were scanning for new credit cards, big purchases, anything I hadn't been told about. You might be wondering, why didn't you just divorce him? I asked myself that too. The answer is complicated. Part of me still loved the man he used to be, the boy who'd walked me home from the church picnic, who'd held my hand in the hospital when Aaron was born, who'd painted that kitchen yellow with more paint on his nose than on the walls. Part of me was scared. I'd seen friends go through divorces that left them emotionally and financially wrecked, and part of me wanted to see how far he would go. I wanted the truth laid bare. No, maybe it's not that bad. No, maybe I'm imagining things. I wanted whatever he chose to do to stand in the light without me having to drag it there. Plus, I'm my mother's daughter. We don't just walk away, we prepare. If you understand that kind of quiet strength, let me know in the comments. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is plan in silence. The second twist came when Samuel got sick. It started as a small cough. "Must be that AC at the office," he said, thumping his chest lightly. "They keep it freezing in there." Then he started losing weight. "You look good," people said. "What's your secret?" "Stress," he'd reply with a grin. "Y'all want it?" At first, I almost believed him. We were in our 50s. Bodies change. Appetites shift. But then there were the nights when he'd come home, sit on the couch, and just stare. His energy drained. His skin looked a little duller. His eyes a little too glassy. One night, he came home and barely made it through the door before he collapsed on the living room floor. "Sam!" I screamed, dropping to my knees. His body went limp in my arms, his head lolling. His breath came shallow and rapid. The 911 operator knew my voice. "Denise, what's going on?" "Chest pain, shortness of breath, possible collapse," I said automatically, my nurse training kicking in even while my heart raced. 58-year-old male, history of high blood pressure. "It's my husband. Hurry." The ride to the hospital felt like a movie I'd seen too many times. Except now I was in it. The sirens, the jerks of the stretcher, the blur of fluorescent lights above us as they rushed him through the ER doors. I'd walked down that hallway 1,000 times in my scrubs. Never like this. The hospital smells different when you're the family and not the staff. The lights are harsher. The beeping is louder. Time moves like molasses and lightning at the same time. They did tests. So many tests. I watched numbers flash on screens. Lines spike and dip. I knew too much. Sometimes knowledge is a curse. Finally, the doctor, a young woman I'd mentored when she was a student, took me aside. "Denise," she said gently, "we need to talk." "Just tell me," I said. "No sugarcoating." "It's cancer," she said. "A very aggressive one. It started in the lungs. It's spread." The word hung in the air between us. "We can try treatment," she continued. "Chemo, maybe radiation. It might shrink the tumors, buy some time. But it's advanced." I nodded slowly. My mind went quiet, strangely. "How long?" "Maybe a year," she said. "Maybe less. It depends on how his body responds." I walked into his room. Samuel lay there, cheeks sunken, eyes too big in his face. The oxygen tube sat under his nose, hissing softly. He looked smaller, like life had shrunk him. He looked up at me, vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen in years. "Am I dying?" he asked quietly. "We all are," I said, sitting beside him and taking his hand. "You just gotta." Timeline. He let out a weak laugh. "Of all the nurses in this hospital, I had to marry the one who doesn't sugarcoat." "I married a man who promised to be honest with me," I replied. "Guess we both lost something along the way." He looked at me sharply, then looked away, staring at the wall. In that moment, I made a decision. I wasn't going to scream about Tiffany. Not yet. I wasn't going to leave him in that hospital bed alone. That's not who I am. But I also wasn't going to stop what I'd started. While he went through chemo and radiation, I was there, changing his sheets, holding his hand when he vomited, rubbing his back when the pain hit. I learned the schedule of his meds better than some of the nurses. I advocated for him with doctors when they tried to rush through explanations. At the same time, I kept my meetings with Mr. Franklin. We finalized the trust that quietly moved the house out of Samuel's direct ownership. We created a living will for me. We shifted accounts, closed some, opened others. One afternoon, between treatments, he looked at me with tears in his eyes. "Why are you still here?" he whispered, his voice breaking. "After everything I've done?" My heart stopped. "So you do know what you've done," I said quietly, my fingers still smoothing the edge of his blanket. He swallowed. His hand trembled in mine. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I thought you'd leave. I almost wanted you to. So I wouldn't have to see your face when you found out." "Found out what?" I asked softly, even though I already knew. "About Tiffany," he said. The name fell out of his mouth like a stone. "About the will." I sat back, studying him. "You changed your will?" "I washed your clothes, raised your child, sat in ER waiting rooms with you. I held your hand through layoffs and late bills. And you say I never needed you?" He closed his eyes. "That's not what No," I said, holding up my hand. "You wanted someone who was impressed by your suits and your title. You wanted to be a savior again. Not a partner, a savior. And I got too strong for that role." He sobbed once, a quiet, broken sound. "I changed the will," he whispered. I left everything to her. I don't know what I thought. I thought you'd be fine. You're always fine. You always land on your feet." "I was going to set something up later," he mumbled. Time got away from me." "Time has a way of doing that," I said softly, echoing the doctor from earlier. I left the room, my body shaking. In the hallway, I leaned against the wall and took a deep breath. Nurses bustled around me, monitors beeped. Life and death continued their dance all around us. That night, I met with my lawyer again. So he confirmed the new will, Mr. Franklin said, tapping his pen on the desk. Leaving everything to her. Yes, I said. Everything. And he thinks I don't know or can't do anything. Mr. Franklin smiled slightly. Good. That makes what we've already done even more important. His will can say what it says, but what's actually in his estate, when he dies, that's another question entirely. You see, while Samuel had been busy rewriting his will, I'd been busy rewriting the rest of our life. The house? It was now in a trust, under my control. Thanks to some quiet legal maneuvering and documentation of his financial diversions. My own will? Updated, with clear instructions for Aaron. The savings and retirement accounts? Reallocated, consolidated, some new ones created in my name only. And there was one more thing. A small investment Samuel never paid attention to, that had grown surprisingly large over the years, under my careful watch. Back when Aaron was little, I'd put a little money every month into a boring mutual fund I picked after a financial counselor at the hospital gave a talk about wealth building for working folks. Samuel had laughed. Wealth building? He'd said, on a nurse's salary? Well, something is more than nothing, I'd replied. And nothing is what I had growing up. Now, decades later, that something had become real money, and Samuel hadn't even remembered it existed. Are you sure you don't want to contest his will? Mr. Franklin asked. We could argue undue influence, mental state due to illness, fiduciary duty breaches. I've seen judges throw out wills for less. I shook my head. No, let it stand. He raised an eyebrow. You're sure? Yes, I said. I want his will to be read exactly as he wrote it. Everything to the mistress. Why? He asked, genuinely curious. Because some people only learn from seeing the full consequences of their choices. I said, I want everyone in that room to hear that sentence. I want there to be no confusion about what he did. And I want a clean cut, no gray areas, no maybe he meant. He did what he did. I'll do what I do. If you're still here, drop a comment and tell me, would you have fought the will before he died? Or would you have let it play out, like I planned to? Samuel died on a rainy Thursday morning. The sky was gray. The streets were slick. The rain tapped on the hospital window like fingers. I sat beside his bed, holding his hand as his breath grew shallow. His fingers had lost their strength. The ring I'd put on his finger 28 years ago slipped loosely on the knuckle. Aaron had flown in the night before and was on the other side of the bed, tears streaming down his face. Dad, he whispered, voice cracking. I'm here. Ma's here. Samuel's eyes fluttered open one last time. He looked at Aaron, then at me. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice a thread. For everything. I squeezed his hand. Rest now, I said. His last breath left his body like a sigh. Just like that, 28 years were over. The monitor flatlined with a soft, steady tone. The nurse came in, pressed a button, and the room went quiet. The funeral was complicated. The church was packed. People came from our neighborhood, from his office, from my hospital. The choir sang those old hymns that reach into your chest and pull out tears you didn't know you had left. Tiffany came, dressed in black this time, standing in the back with sunglasses on, like she was some celebrity hiding from paparazzi. She had a little bump showing under her dress now. A few people whispered, glancing between her and me. The gossip had gotten around faster than the obituary. During the repast, she approached me. I'm sorry for your loss, she said, her voice low. Which loss are you talking about? I asked, looking her right in the eyes. She flinched, then straightened her shoulders. His, she said. Ours. I just nodded and walked away to refill an auntie's plate. There would be time enough for her later. After the burial, after the casseroles and the if you need anything call me Mies, came the day of the will reading. Which brings us back to that room. Everything goes to the mistress. The lawyer's words hung in the air like smoke that wouldn't clear. Aaron punched the arm of his chair. This is wrong, he said. My father would never. He would, I said quietly. He did. How are you so calm? Aaron demanded, turning to me. There was hurt in his eyes and a hint of accusation. Maybe he thought my calm meant I didn't care. I turned to him, put my hand over his, the same way I had when he was little and scared of thunder. Because, my son, I've had more time to make peace with the man your father became. Tiffany cleared her throat delicately. I'm sorry, she said, though she didn't sound sorry at all. I know this is difficult. but Sam wanted to make sure I was taken care of. For the baby. Her hand went to her belly, as if on cue. The baby? Erin repeated, eyes wide. Yes, she said, her voice softer now, taking on a practiced tremble. I'm pregnant. 2 months. I felt a sharp sting in my chest, not jealousy exactly, just the final nail in the coffin of the life I thought I had. A sibling, Erin whispered. I have a sibling? Half-sibling, I corrected gently. By blood, anyway. The lawyer shuffled his papers, obviously uncomfortable. Mrs. Thompson, he said, I understand if you want to take time to process this before we discuss options. No need, I said, reaching into my bag. I came prepared. I placed my own folder on the table. It was thicker than his, labeled neatly, Denise Thompson, Estate, Trusts, Property. What is this? Tiffany asked, eyes narrowing, her glossy lips pressing together. This, I said calmly, is my life's work on paper. I opened it slowly, like I had all the time in the world. Inside were neatly clipped documents, binder tabs, highlighted sections. This was the physical form of every long night I'd spent at that kitchen table, every quiet meeting in Mr. Franklin's office. First of all, I said, pulling out a document with a blue ribbon attached, this is the trust deed for the house you think you're getting. You're not. Samuel did not own this house at the time of his death. It was transferred into a trust 18 months ago, for the benefit of myself and my son. You'll find the signatures here, here, and here. I slid the paper across the table to the lawyer. He adjusted his glasses, read, and his eyes widened. She's correct, he said slowly, flipping pages. This property is not part of Mr. Thompson's estate. What? Tiffany's voice went shrill, losing its smoothness. But he told me, he said the house was mine. He said that we could move in, that maybe he believed that, I said. He was misinformed. He didn't always read the fine print. I do. I pulled out another document, this one a stack of account statements. These are the retirement accounts, I continued. The ones he listed in his will. Most of them were cashed out under his direction and new accounts were created. Some in his name, some in mine. The ones in my name are not part of his estate. The ones in his name, well, you can have those. They're not as much as you think, once you account for what he spent trying to impress you. Erin stared at me, mouth open. Ma, when did you? While you were building your own life, I said softly, my voice catching a little. I was making sure I didn't lose mine. I opened another folder within the folder, a subfolder labeled Evidence. Bank statements with certain charges highlighted. Hotel receipts. Transfers to an account in Tiffany's name. Tiffany, you recognize these transactions? I asked, my tone clinical, like I was reviewing a patient file. She leaned forward, eyes skimming the pages, her face drained of color. Where did you get this? Joint accounts are not private, I said. And let's just say, hospitals aren't the only places where people underestimate how much a quiet, middle-aged black woman can understand. You think only white men in suits know how to read numbers? The lawyer cleared his throat. Mrs. Thompson is right. In light of the documentation she's provided, and which I have seen portions of before, much of what Mr. Thompson believed was his was in fact marital or already legally protected assets. There is limited remaining liquid wealth in his sole name. I pulled out one last envelope, thicker and newer than the rest, and placed it in front of Erin. And this, I said, is my will, already signed and notarized. In it, everything I truly own, the house, my accounts, my investments, goes to my son, with a provision, I added, turning to Tiffany, for a college fund for your child. Innocent children should not suffer for their parents' mistakes. But you, Tiffany, you will get exactly what Samuel left you in his will, minus whatever the law reclaims due to his poor decisions. Mr. Franklin, who had been sitting quietly near the back, stepped forward. I hadn't introduced him when we walked in. I let people assume he was just a support person. Perhaps I should formally introduce myself, he said politely. I'm Mr. Franklin, Mrs. Thompson's attorney. I've been overseeing her estate planning and asset protection measures for the last 2 years. Everything she's described today has been carried out legally, with full documentation. Tiffany stared at me, trembling. So you knew, she said slowly. This whole time you knew about us, And you just stayed? I looked at her, really looked at her. Under the makeup and the attitude and the rehearsed expressions, she was just a scared young woman who'd latched onto the wrong man and thought his lies would turn into a future. I stayed for me, I said. Not for him, not for you, for me. To make sure I didn't act out of rage and leave myself unprotected. To make sure my son's future wasn't destroyed by his father's midlife crisis. I stayed long enough to build something you couldn't just walk into and claim. Aaron looked at me with tears in his eyes. Ma, I had no idea. I thought you were just letting it happen. You weren't supposed to, I said. You had your own life to live. I wasn't about to make you carry this on your back when you were just starting yours. Tiffany suddenly stood up, knocking her chair back. It fell with a clatter. This isn't over, she spat. I'll take you to court. I'll tell everyone what you did. You manipulated a sick man. You're free to tell anyone you like, I said calmly. Just remember that all of this, I gestured to the papers, was done before he got sick, when he was still healthy enough to sign contracts and sneak around behind my back. You pressured a married man to leave his wife right before he died. Tell that story too. See how people react. See how the judges react when they see the dates on these documents. She froze. Her mouth opened, then closed again. Her eyes darted from the papers to the lawyer to Aaron to Mr. Franklin. The performance had slipped. Now it was just raw fear and anger. Finally, she grabbed her purse with shaking hands, shot me a look full of hate and something like regret, and stormed out of the room. The door slammed behind her, rattling the glass. Silence settled over us like a blanket. The lawyer, the one handling Samuel's will, slowly took off his glasses. Well, he said, letting out a breath. In all my years of doing this, I don't think I've ever seen a will reading quite like that. There was a hint of admiration in his voice, buried under professional shock. I looked at Aaron. He was staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time, not as just his mother, the woman who packed his lunches and stayed up when he was sick, but as a whole person. A strategist, a survivor. Ma, he whispered, voice thick. You're a badass. I laughed, a wet, shaky laugh that turned into a little sob. I put my hand to my chest. Watch your language, I said, wiping my eyes. I'm still your mother. If you're still here, type respect for Denise in the comments, because this was the moment I stopped feeling like a victim in my own life. But the story doesn't end there. After the will reading, life didn't magically become easy. Tiffany did try to fight in court, just like she threatened. She found herself a slick lawyer who tried to spin a story about me manipulating Samuel, about me coercing him into moving assets without his full comprehension. She took advantage of a vulnerable man in a strained marriage, her lawyer said dramatically in court, pointing in my direction. Mr. Franklin simply slid forward a neat folder of documents with dates, signatures, and even emails where Samuel himself had initiated discussions about estate planning and tax advantages. Some of those emails were him bragging to coworkers about being smart with money and making sure the government doesn't get more than they should. He hadn't realized that his arrogance would one day protect me. The judge, an older black woman with eyes that missed nothing, flipped through the documents, then looked over her glasses at Tiffany. Miss Owens, she said, from what I see here, Mrs. Thompson took steps to secure her own future in light of your relationship with her husband. Those steps were legal and, frankly, prudent. Your client, she glanced at Tiffany's lawyer, is entitled to what Mr. Thompson actually owned at his death, per his will. Unfortunately for her, that is significantly less than she appears to have expected. In the end, Tiffany got some of what Samuel had left her, some remaining cash, a modest life insurance payout, a car that still had payments on it. Enough to live on, enough to raise her child. I didn't want her destitute. I just didn't want her living in the house I'd scrubbed and painted and prayed in for decades, walking on floors I'd mopped with my own hands, claiming a porch I'd dreamed of long before she ever knew his name. Months passed. The first morning I woke up alone without Samuel's wheezing breaths, without hospital calls. The house felt too quiet. No machines, no visitors, no constant tension. Just quiet. I made myself coffee, the way I liked it, strong, a little sugar, no compromise. I sat on that porch he'd promised me years ago, the same one he thought he could sign away, and listened to the birds. The silence was loud, but not empty. It was peaceful. Rain had washed the dust off the roses. They'd grown thick and strong over the years, red blooms spilling over the little fence. I thought about how many storms those roses had been through, how many times I'd trimmed them back, thinking they'd never come back as full. But they always did. Aaron started visiting more often. Sometimes he'd come over on Fridays with a bag of takeout, sit at the kitchen table, and say, "Tell me more about when you and Dad were young, before all this." So I did. I told him about the church picnic, the tiny apartment over the laundromat. The first time we held him in our arms and looked at each other like, what do we do now? I didn't sugarcoat the bad, but I didn't erase the good either. People are complicated. Samuel was no exception. One evening, we were sitting there when my phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from an unknown number. "Hi, Mrs. Thompson. This is Tiffany. I just wanted you to know I had the baby. A boy, I named him Elijah." I stared at the screen for a long time. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. Aaron glanced over. "Everything okay?" "It's your brother," I said quietly. "He's here." He looked conflicted, hurt, angry, and curious. It played across his face like clouds over the sun. "Can I see?" he asked. I handed him the phone. There was a picture attached. A tiny wrinkled baby in a blue blanket, eyes squeezed shut, little fists up by his cheeks. He looked like every newborn, a little alien, a little old man, a little angel. "He didn't ask to be here," I said softly. "None of this is his fault." Aaron nodded slowly. "Can I text her back?" "That's up to you," I said. "You're a grown man now. Just remember, whatever relationship you decide to have with her or with him, it doesn't change what your father did, and it doesn't change who you are." He ended up responding. Slowly, cautiously, he began building some kind of connection with his little brother. Sometimes he'd go visit them on his own. He'd come back quiet, thoughtful. He didn't always tell me, and I didn't always ask. Boundaries go both ways. Once, he did tell me about a visit. He said, "Ma, he looks like Dad. The way he frowns in his sleep, it's weird." But when he grabbed my finger, all that anger I carried just shifted. Not gone, but moved. As for me, I went back to living, which after years of surviving and planning, and waiting for the other shoe to drop, felt like visiting a foreign country. I picked up old hobbies I'd abandoned. I joined a book club at the library. Imagine that, me, who used to sneak books to escape my childhood, now sitting in a circle of women my age, talking about characters and plot twists and motivations like it was the most natural thing in the world. We read everything, from Toni Morrison to little cozy mysteries. Sometimes I'd share bits of my life when they'd ask, "Have you ever met someone like this character?" And I'd think, "Baby, I've met worse." I started gardening again, but this time, not just roses. Tomatoes, peppers, herbs. There's something healing about putting your hands in the earth, about watching something grow because you took the time to care for it. My neighbors noticed. Miss Denise, the little boy next door, called one day, hanging over the fence. "Can I help you water?" "Only if you promise not to drown my basil," I said, handing him the hose. He laughed, and just like that, my quiet world had small voices in it again. On Sundays, I'd go to church and sit in the pew, feeling the wood under my hands. Some of the older women would look at me with that special mixture of pity and respect, reserved for widows who've been through something. One of them, Sister Geraldine, sidled up to me after service one day. "I heard about that will situation," she said, patting my arm. "You handled that with grace and a little bit of holy vengeance." I laughed. "I just did what I had to do." "Don't ever let nobody make you feel wrong for protecting what you built," she said. "God gave you a brain for a reason." I took that as confirmation. One Saturday, a few months later, Aaron showed up with a camera and a little tripod. "What's that for?" I asked, wiping dirt off my hands on my jeans. I'd been out back talking to my tomatoes again. "And starting a little YouTube channel," he said, cheeks a little pink. "Stories, interviews, real people's lives. People are hungry for that. They don't just want polished influencers. They want truth. I want to start with you. Me? I laughed, genuinely surprised. What do I have to say that anybody wants to hear? Everything, he said. You have everything to say. Do you know how many people need to hear what you've been through? How you came out of it standing? How you planned? How you didn't fall apart? I hesitated. The idea of putting my business out for strangers to poke at made my stomach twist. But then I thought about all the women I'd seen at the hospital, whispering in corners about husbands, money, kids, wills, about all the women watching their lives slip away because they'd been taught being good meant being silent. If one woman hears this and decides to protect herself sooner, I said, maybe it's worth it. He smiled. Then let's do it. Just talk like you always talk to me, like you're telling me a story over dinner. That's how I ended up here, talking to you, sharing my story. Now, as we come to the end, I want to leave you with a few things I've learned. And I want you to tell me in the comments which one hits you the hardest. Really think about it. And if you haven't already, make sure you've liked this video and subscribed to this channel, because there are more stories like mine that need to be told. First, never underestimate the quiet ones. People looked at me and saw a tired, middle-aged nurse, a devoted wife, a soft-spoken mother. They didn't see the woman counting every dollar, reading every line of every document, planning for a future she wasn't sure would include the man she loved. They saw my apron, not my armor. They heard my yes, dear, and missed the part where I was also saying, not yet, I'm not done protecting myself. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, not yet, wait, prepare. Second, love does not mean blindness. I loved my husband. I loved the man he was, and I mourned the man he became. I mourned the parts of him that were swallowed by ego and fear and the need to feel young again. But love is not a license for someone to destroy you. You can forgive a person and still protect yourself. You can sit by their hospital bed, wipe their forehead, and also sit in a lawyer's office signing documents. You can cry at their funeral and still say, no, you cannot have the house I scrubbed for 30 years. Those things are not mutually exclusive. Boundaries and compassion can live in the same heart. Third, children are not bargaining chips. Samuel thought he could leave everything to his mistress because Denise will be fine and Aaron will manage. He forgot that children watch everything we do. They see who we honor, who we hurt, who we apologize to, and who we don't. He thought he could handle his betrayal like a side plot, something separate from his role as a father. But when Aaron looked at me in that lawyer's office and said, Ma, you're a badass, what he was really saying was, I see you. I see what you carried. I see how you protected us, even when we didn't know. Our kids learn from how we treat ourselves, not just how we treat them. Fourth, greed has a cost. Tiffany went after a married man with money. She thought the life I had would be hers. A big house, security, respectability. She thought all she had to do was stand by his side at some galas and whisper sweet words about feeling safe and taken care of. But she forgot two things. One, if a man will betray his wife for you, he'll betray you for someone else when you're no longer shiny and new. And two, what's built on lies doesn't stand forever. The foundation crumbles eventually. In the end, she got some money, but not the life she thought she was inheriting. The price? Her reputation, her peace, and years of being the woman who broke up a home. Every time someone looks at her and that baby, they're going to have opinions. That's a heavy tax for a little slice of someone else's pie. Finally, and this is the biggest one for me, you are allowed to choose yourself. For so long, I thought being a good wife and mother meant sacrificing myself entirely. That if I even thought about what would happen to me, I was selfish. That my job was to hold everybody else together, even if I was falling apart. Then I realized my son didn't need a martyr. He needed a mother who respected herself. My future grandchildren don't need a grandma who's bitter and broke because she gave away everything for the sake of an image of loyalty that nobody honored back. Me choosing to protect my future, my home, my rights, that wasn't selfish. That was survival. That was wisdom. That was me honoring the little girl who watched her mama split money into envelopes labeled, just in case. So if you're listening to this and you feel like you're fading in your own life, hear me. You are allowed to pick up a pen and rewrite your ending. Quietly, carefully, and with your head held high. You are allowed to go to a lawyer. You are allowed to say, what happens to me if he doesn't choose me? and then act accordingly. You are allowed to bring your own folder to the table. I'm going to end this here, sitting on my porch, coffee in hand. The sun setting over the neighborhood I helped build a life in. The yellow paint in the kitchen is faded now, but it still glows in the evenings. My roses are blooming, heavy and bright. Somewhere across town, a little boy named Elijah is learning to walk. My son Aaron is probably editing this video right now, cutting out the parts where I ramble too much, leaving in the parts that he thinks will help somebody. If my story touched you, if you learned something, if you saw a little bit of yourself in me, please leave a comment and tell me which part hit home. Was it the quiet planning? The confrontation in the lawyer's office? The way I chose both compassion and boundaries? Tell me. I read those comments. I really do. Don't forget to like this video so more people can find it, and subscribe to the channel for more real stories from real lives. Stories of women like me, like you, like your mama or your auntie, who've walked through fire and came out with their edges singed but their souls intact. And remember, you might think you're just the quiet one in the corner, the one people underestimate. But one day, when the lawyer says everything goes to the mistress, you just might be the one who smiles, opens your own folder, and changes the whole